The simplest way to think of rendering is as the study of light. Our eyes basically perceive the world visually by picking up rays of light that bounce off objects. We don't want to get too much into the detailed nitty-gritty physics of what's happening, but like many things in art, the rules are quite simple when it comes to sort of understanding rendering, but the practice is complicated. So if we think of a world kind of without light, we have a world without form, because without light, we kind of can't pick up any visual representation of anything, and essentially you kind of have darkness. And, this is kind of not entirely dark, but let's kind of, think of it as a bit of like a gray nothingness. So this is kind of what happens if we can't see anything. And what happens when we look at objects is that light bounces off those objects from a light source, and then it bounces to our eye and we pick up. And based on kind of what happens with that light, the surfaces that it's bouncing off of, it's going to come back and meet our eye and have a certain color or a certain based on how much light kind of bounces back, we can pick up an understanding of what that surface is, what that object is. So this stuff sounds really complicated, but that's kind of the root physics of it. And much of the technicalities that follow are simply an extrapolation of that very simple concept. So if we have nothing on the page at all, we're not seeing anything. But let's say, I kind of make something. So let's kind of have a sort of a gray box. So as soon as I kind of change the value here, you can see that my eye is picking something up. So one of the most important rules, probably, the most important rule when it comes to kind of rendering and understanding what's happening here is that when the values change, and by value we really just mean the light and dark values, the value of that sort of color or tone, whether it's light or dark. Typically this is expressed on a value scale, kind of, white being 1 and black being 10, or vice versa. But the idea is that as soon as we change the value, what this is saying to our brain is that there's something different. There's that this shape is different to this. And normally when we view the world, what's happening there is that light is bouncing off something here and it's coming back, and we're like, something is there. So our brain is really developed to kind of pick up these changes in value, changes in contrast, and try and build something. And obviously when we look at the world, we kind of see everything out there, like plants, trees, buildings, cars, people, and all this light is bouncing everywhere, and we're kind of perceiving it and understanding what's going on. And with art, our goal is to basically trick the eye into seeing something that's three-dimensional, or represents something on a two-dimensional surface. So we're trying to represent a three-dimensional concept, a three-dimensional sort of image inside someone's head, and we're trying to kind of transmute that through a two-dimensional surface. Again, some of this stuff might sound sort of a bit too technical, but I really think either you can just kind of ignore the physics of it and the psychology of it and just be like, okay, I'm just going to do these rendering exercises. But if you're curious why, I think this will shed a lot of light, pun intended, on sort of what's going on. So at this point, we've got something's happening. Our eyes are picking up. There's a box, right? And that's all. We're just saying there's a shape here. It's flat, so it doesn't really have any form yet. And basically, we can just sort of elaborate on this and try and sort of just get some painting tools and try and sort of trick the eye into doing something else. So at the moment we've got a flat object here, but let's try and sort of maybe put a bit of a gradient on it. So what I've done is I've changed the values there, and that's changed the form. So our eye is sort of searching this arrangement of values, and it's trying to pick up and make sense of it, because that's what it does when you look at the world. Our eyes are kind of, and mostly your brain, not necessarily your eyes, because the brain does most of the processing. That's kind of saying, like, your eyes, this different light is bouncing off the monitor or wherever you're viewing this, and then it's going to the brain. Brain's going, what's happening? How am I, like, what is that thing? And we've got quite advanced pattern sensing tools, that are basically designed to try and sort of defeat camouflage in the wild and whatever. Sort of from an evolutionary biology point of view, there's lots and lots of neurons in your brain that are there to kind of pick up patterns and find form in nothing. So you can see that tiger that's camouflaged in the forest trying to get you. So immediately, as soon as I change the value, our brain is trying to go, what is this? What's happening? What's happening? So if I play around with it, I could maybe sort of, go, well, okay, maybe it could be sort of like a shiny pipe or something. So I've kind of just made some gradients, and it's just a box, but our brain is trying to kind of figure out what could this be? What could be happening there? And this is what's happening when you draw anything, is that you put marks down on paper, and when someone views it, their brain is like trying to figure out, what is that? What's going on? So this could be, sort of like a pipe or something like that. And if I sort of try and there we go. It could definitely be possible for me to sort of convince you more that what we're looking at is a pipe or some kind of cylinder. So I'm adding kind of this end to it, and that's going to add to that feeling like, oh, now there's more form. I've shown more sort of different changes in the form, and our brain is kind of picking it up, and it's like, what is going on there? Oh, okay, that could be it. Let's see if I can. So again, your brain is trying to interpret that, and maybe it's like a bit of pipe that's kind of curved towards us a bit, so we can see sort of each edge. Or you might be seeing something completely different. It really depends, because when we've got such a simple abstract shape, kind of, the sky's the limit, really. So I'm just going to try and sort of complete this. There we go. And trying to isolate some selections so I can sort of get rid of that. So now just kind of fiddled around with Photoshop, and I've changed a few of the planes and stuff, which are kind of, they're quite arbitrary, but because of sort of the knowledge I have, or just because of the sort of random hapstance of what's happening with these forms, it's possible for me to kind of say, okay, this was just a gradient, and now if I add this, then your brain is going to try and interpret it. But, there's many sort of different types of interpretations you could have for this same object. If we go back to the original one and say, okay, here's a flat sort of nothing. Now let's add this. What else could this be? Another thing that could be happening here is that this is some kind of sort of environment, and maybe we've got some sort of clouds in the background or something. Because one of the major, as well as this kind of showing a rounded form, one of the things that we're really keyed into is sort of seeing the horizon line on something. So, if I sort of put some clouds in here, just by changing shapes and putting some stuff in here, which really aren't. None of these things are too descriptive, they don't have much texture, but it's just paying attention to sort of the atmospheric perspective, changing a few of the values, and, now all of a sudden we've got a very sort of different, let's put a little sort of guy in there. Yeah, now we've got sort of quite a different, sort of feeling. So that's basically what's happening all the time when you look at art, is that we're looking at a picture plane, something, if we kind of zoom up, and our eye is just running pattern recognition on it all the time, as it runs pattern recognition on everything all the time. So when we see an image, we are just sort of going, oh, what's that? Brain interprets it. So this is why the concept of rendering, rendering is kind of one word for it, but basically, it's sort of just understanding form and being able to kind of show that form. So the simplest way to do that really is just to kind of understand how light works and how light sort of affects your sort of understanding of the world, and just kind of all of that really basic stuff. So it's just, again, your standing sort of in the middle of the world, and you've got sort of stuff around you and stuff further away, and what's happening is that you have light source somewhere over here, and your kind of light is kind of bouncing off something and sort of hitting your eye all the time. And this sort of tells us about the world, what's going on. So it's kind of like it's a sense, but that this is the metric of sort of sight really is kind of light. It's light rays. And this will kind of say, this will bounce off and come back, and it'll say like, it doesn't necessarily come back, it's just going to your eye, and this says this is a tree, and the properties of that tree and the way it looks, the way it's sort of shadowed and stuff, will kind of tell us about what it looks like. So as with most things, you can imagine that this is very complicated. There's lots of stuff going on, an infinite amount of light bouncing off everything, and light bounces off other objects, and other objects kind of almost become light emitting objects themselves, because light bounces off. So, like light comes from a sun and will bounce off a tree, and then light will then bounce off to something else, which will bounce off. And so color gets very, very complicated. But the best way to kind of understand it is just to break it down into the kind of most basic portions. And what we do to figure that out is just kind of study actually very close to this, which is rendering simple geometric forms so we can really control and drill down onto just the basics of what's happening when light is hitting simple objects. And through doing that, we can get a greater and greater understanding of what's happening. But I don't want that to appear too sort of banal, because certainly when it comes to sort of perspective and lighting and the techniques and the exercises that we do are sort of quite simple, quite mundane, but it really can't be overstated how much those very simple tasks that we're doing will actually parlay into being able to render a wide array of images and scenes and different lighting scenarios. And the more you have control over these simple exercises, the more you'll be able to kind of play with things on a grander scale. So, like these are some examples of some quite good sort of lighting and rendering by John Singer Sargent. And you can see they show like a range of kind of lighting scenarios. And this is someone who has, really, really good control over sort of understanding light and how that works. And you can see that once you do understand those basics and you have control of your medium, it's possible to kind of create much more expressive images that sort of look like there's light in there, looks like there's life and color and everything's kind of reading right. But it's very, very difficult to kind of get to this level without understanding sort of how would light affect a simple cube, because one of the things with sort of viewing the world, talking about sort of this stuff again, is that often there's a lot of complexity that's actually going on there, but our brain kind of filters it out. And, this is sort of one of those things where our brain is kind of used to light affecting planes and objects. And what happens is that we kind of ignore the fact that value is changing if we know, and our brain can recognize that value is changing because something's casting a shadow on that wall. Like for instance, with these kind of shadows, because we understand the way lighting is working, we don't assume that there's kind of a real depression in the wall or something because light's coming from over here. All the cues are telling us that these are kind of shadows of some variety. So often what you think you're seeing is not actually what's there. And that's one of the real skills of painting, especially kind of natural painting, where you're kind of trying to represent things and sort of push color and be a bit more expressive, is kind of actually seeing and understanding what colors are in front of you when you're looking at an environment, if you're painting it from life. It can actually be a skill to start to notice those things, because certainly people who are not artists and sort of everyday people who are just looking at the world don't notice the degree of reflected light. We kind of filter it out. We just see a tree. We don't see that like, oh, that tree is kind of, the bottom of it's a bit sort of yellow because, there's some sort of yellow grass or yellow sort of straw underneath it, and that's bouncing up and that's creating this. Or, the other one is sort of if you're sitting maybe underneath a tree and you've got light streaming through a tree, and basically, if you actually kind of looked at it, you'd say like, oh, everything's kind of a bit green tinged because the light is coming through the tree, and it'll be like just a little bit sort of tinged green because everything's kind of bouncing off that tree. But when we look at it, we don't say like, oh, wow, this person sitting next to me is green. You just kind of filter it out and sort of go, oh, well, I'm just sitting under a tree. This is like nothing's the problem. But if you were to represent that and have someone sitting under a tree, but you don't consider the fact that a lot of the colors might be tinged green because there's a lot of foliage around and light's gonna bounce off that, then someone will actually look at that and go like, well, that doesn't look right. I don't know why, but things look different when I'm under a tree. I don't know why. And it's because we're kind of filtering out the reason why all those colors are there, and we just perceive the object, because that's what our brain is doing, is we're basically taking in a bunch of information and we're kind of filtering it so that we can better understand the world. And it's well documented that a lot of actual sort of vision, and what we see is kind of filtered out. We kind of choose not to see a lot of things if we don't know what they are or they don't really fit in. And a lot of things are kind of memorized. If you're kind of walking around your house, you're not kind of looking at like new things, you kind of have processed it. It's only when something's kind of, really out of place. And that's one of those things, if you've ever been overseas to like a remarkably different sort of architectural style or something, you'll just be looking around going like, whoa, what is going on? Because your brain is processing this new visual information. So new visual information is kind of processed differently to stuff that you're used to seeing. And if you perceive an object and you know what it is, like, this is kind of looks like a boat. We kind of look at it from afar and we're like, oh yeah, I know what that is. But this is quite abstract, and if we're kind of looking at this, upside down, really, these are just kind of really abstract marks, and our brain's going to be like, what is going on there? Let me try and figure this one out. And it'll just constantly be like churning at those things. So if you're looking at things which you haven't had a lot of experience at, it's going to take a lot of sort of brain power. So we're kind of used to seeing certain things, and it's really important to understand that as an artist. So that's just a brief kind of overview of kind of like what lighting is, and we'll kind of go over some of the technical aspects of sort of how we go about creating these objects in the coming exercises.